Do you remember The Ghost of Miss Muir? The TV series, not the 1947 movie. Running for about 50 episodes from 68 to 70, this supernatural sitcom blended comedy, romance, and ghostly shenanigans. The first season aired on NBC. Then, in a move that was pretty unusual for the time, the show jumped over to ABC for the second and final season. The series was based on the beloved 1947 film, but instead of focusing on the drama, the television series leaned heavily into comedy and character relationships. Welcome to the Rabbit Ears Rewind, where I review, deep dive, and theorize about the shows you loved as a kid in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and sometimes the 80s. Hit that like and follow button and let's get to it. And please don't forget to share. The story follows young widow Carolyn Muir, played by Hope Lange. Looking for a fresh start, she moves with her 2 children into a seaside home known as Gull Cottage. Along for the ride is Martha, the family's loyal housekeeper, played by Reta Shaw. Sounds simple enough, right? Except Gull Cottage already has a resident, Captain Daniel Gregg. A gruff, stubborn 19th century sea captain who just happens to be dead. Edward Mulhare plays Captain Gregg, and honestly it's impossible to imagine anyone else in that role. At first, the captain wants Carolyn out of his house. And after all, he'd been haunting the place by himself quite efficiently 4 years. But before long, the two develop an unlikely friendship that becomes the heart of the entire series. And that's really why the show works. It never tries to be scary. It never turns into a haunted house story. Instead, it's only about 2 lonely people helping each other navigate through life, even if one of them happens to be a ghost. The chemistry between Hope Lange and Edward Mulhare is absolutely fantastic. In fact, Lange won Emmy Awards for both seasons of this show's run. Not bad for a sitcom about a widow living with a dead sea captain, am I right? Then there's Charles Nelson Reilly as Claymore Gregg, the living captain's only descendant. A writer who rents the cottage to Carolyn and somehow manages to be both charming and incredibly irritating at exactly the same time. Which is pretty much peak Charles Nelson Reilly. The captain can barely tolerate him, and many of their scenes together are comedy gold. What makes The Ghost of Miss Muir stand out is how different it felt from most of the fantasy sitcoms of the late 60s. Television was full of magical gimmicks back then. You had witches, you had genies, you had monsters, talking animals, and all sorts of strange supernatural situations. But this show was surprisingly grounded. There weren't alien invasions, no supervillains, no world-ending threats, just witty conversations, life lessons, and a ghost trying to help Carolyn through challenges that everyday life could throw at her. Sometimes the captain would use his supernatural abilities to solve a problem, other times he would use them to cause one. But underneath it all was a genuinely sweet relationship that felt more heartfelt than most sitcoms of the era. One thing I've always found interesting is that this show never fully committed to making it a romantic relationship, but the affection was definitely there, and it got kind of awkward sometimes. The chemistry was obvious, but because, well, one of them is a ghost, the writer focused on the friendship, companionship, and emotional support instead, and not making it that weird. And honestly, I think the show is better off because of it. Behind the scenes, the show had one of the stranger journeys of the late 60s television runs. Despite strong reviews and a loyal fan base, NBC canceled it after 1 season. ABC stepped in and saved it for a second year. While the format didn't drastically change, the move to ABC leaned a little bit heavier into the whimsical sitcom style of the era. Unfortunately, even the network jump couldn't save it from challenging viewing habits and the difficult Friday night time slot. So after 2 seasons, Gull Cottage closed its doors for good. My final thoughts on The Ghost of Miss Muir. It's one of the most underrated fantasy sitcoms of the 60s, like I've kind of inferred the whole time. It doesn't have the popularity of Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie, and it doesn't have the gimmick of I Dream of Jeannie, and it doesn't have the quirky weirdness of the Addams Family or the Munsters. But what it does have is heart. The friendship between Carolyn Muir and Captain Gregg gives the show an emotional center that many sitcoms never achieve. I find it charming and oddly touching, and it's one of those rare shows where premise sounds completely ridiculous until you actually sit down and watch it. Then it gets pretty good pretty quick. Then suddenly you're rooting for a widow and a ghost captain to spend more time together. Do you remember watching this show? What did I get wrong? What did I get right? And what did I miss? I know I missed something. Did you prefer the NBC version or the ABC version? And what other classic movies and TV shows should I cover next? Because I got a lot coming down. Hit the thumbs up, like and follow this, and please share with your friends. And until next time, we'll see you later on the Rabbit Ears Rewind, folks.